Good evening and welcome to the EcoSchools Wales Back to Basics e-training. Over these three sessions, we're going to be covering the key elements of the programme and giving you guidance on how to run it in your school. This is a live presentation, so there is an opportunity if you're viewing live to ask questions as we go along. However, if you're watching this afterwards, then you can add comments in if you're watching it on YouTube, or I'll be providing you with an email address at the end of the presentation to that you can direct questions to. In this presentation, we'll be covering the elements of the action plan and monitoring and evaluation. In the first presentation, we covered the key criteria of the Eco Committee and the environmental review. This time, we'll be closing the evaluating loop formed with the addition of the action plan and measurement through monitoring and evaluation. The elements of the Eco Code, informing, involving, and linking to the curriculum are topics that will be covered in the final presentation tomorrow. So when looking at the action plan, the key criteria for this are that actions should be undertaken and measures. It should be age appropriate. Your plan should be age appropriate, and that is not just for pupils, but also including staff. It's important that all these criteria that we talk about, they're benchmarks for officers when they come in and assess a school, but they're also there for a reason, and they are actually there for beneficial guidance as well as being benchmarks for the assessment procedure. So having the head support is something that will make the process run more smoothly within your school. Making things age appropriate is something that will benefit in the fact that pupils are able to participate more significantly. When you're thinking of targets, a good place to start will be from the review. Alternatively, you might have, if your EcoSchools is previously established in the school and you are a new coordinator, there may be previous action plans that you can refer back to whether they've been successful or not. Or obviously, you'll need to be flexible should there be suggestions from any members of the school community to bring in new ideas. And all targets should be SMART. That means that they should be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-bound. It's important, and I'll be covering it later, in terms of the process is the most important aspect and not necessarily the outcome. But if you set out with these 5 targets or objectives in place, then it will help the development go a lot more smoothly within your school. This is a template action plan, breaking down your targets into the constituent sections required to plan and be SMART. This template, along with other resources I'll be referring to during the presentation, are available on our website. And I'll be giving you information on where to get those resources from at the end of the presentation. The number of targets is up to you. We do say for the first flag, you need to be sort of covering in that 2-year period or year period leading up to your first green flag. You need to be covering at least 3 of the EcoSchools topics that I mentioned last night in the environmental review. The idea being is that you build up and it eventually will cover all 8 of those topics by the time you get to the 4th flag. So thinking on that basis, it's good to have, in the region of about 6 targets that are manageable to work through over a course of a year. For example, that could be just thinking it as in terms of 2 a term. Before considering examples of actions, it's important to introduce the key criteria for monitoring and evaluating. Understanding this part of the process will make both elements easier in the long term. So the key criteria for monitoring and evaluation are that progress of the actions is discussed either as a committee or the whole school, and some of the work has been undertaken as part of the curriculum. Again, these are things which help. The first criteria here helps to ensure that the pupils have a sense of ownership over the targets, and also if it's being embedded part of the curriculum, which is something we've covered when we're talking about linking to the curriculum, but it helps to ensure that the workload is spread throughout the whole school. And very importantly, which is a recurring message, but this is an Eco School award at the end of the day and not an Eco Committee award. So anything you can do to help share that burden throughout the whole school will actually benefit you in the long run. Importantly, when we're talking about monitoring, what we're actually talking about is actually having a measurement of success. Understanding that the process will make both elements easier in the long term. It's important that you're able to decide whether you actually achieved a positive outcome. As I said earlier, a positive outcome is not essential, since there will always be factors like weather, budget, changes in staffing, which might affect the outcomes. As talked about in terms of the SMART targets, it is important that you try and get targets that are attainable, but at the same time, be flexible for things not going correctly. And it's the reason for making them, it's important for them to be time bound, is so that you're not just putting off targets off and off and off until you succeed, because an important part of it is that children benefit from occasionally from making mistakes, so they can actually reevaluate and actually sort of make improvements. So the key message is that process is more important than the outcome. So even if things don't turn out better as well as you intend, the actual process is far more important. Here are some examples of different ways to demonstrate progress in your action plan targets. There are a variety of different techniques, and not one of them is correct. As often referred to in this presentation, what works is the best way. And but hopefully here are some ideas of how you could actually implement action plan targets. This school was looking at reducing energy consumption, and the way they went about that was to identify, rather than just identifying which lights needed to be left on, which ones would definitely not need to be used if it was sunny outside, which ones should provide you enough light in your classroom during the day, and ones sort of that you should need to think about. This then provided them with a green, amber, and red sticker to go next to the lights. This was in this school, they managed to use this and extrapolate out from the wattage of the bulbs that weren't being used to work out a saving. You could, if you have easy access to meters, see a difference from maybe a week before you implement a project such as this and afterwards. But always be aware of if there's a change in the weather. Often schools may make a great effort to change behavior within the school, but if it's sunny for the first week and then exceptionally cloudy the second one, then you have to take into account that despite school taking in everything that has been presented to them by the committee or in an assembly, then there's always going to be a case whereby lights are going to be left on for longer when it's sort of cloudier. Always try and think of other ways to measure the outcomes of the actions. This school raised a comparatively small sum from selling old clothes, but by looking into what it would have cost had they been bought new, they managed to identify a far bigger sum. And these are sort of ways just help sort of generate a more positive impact to the work achieved. It is important to try and involve everyone, allow them to do it in their own time and to share results visually. This school were investigating what improvements in their school grounds had as an impact on wildlife. What they were encouraging pupils to do is during lunch times and break times, they were allowed to take a pair of binoculars, go out and look for birds, insects and plants, and then come back and note them down on a board. This is a particularly good activity because it encouraged participation by a number of pupils within the school. But then the method of monitoring it was very visual and enabled, again, the results to be seen, to be displayed to a large group of people. Always differentiate the process to make sure all can take part, even the youngest can monitor. In this nursery, they use the idea of sending energy monitors around the school. If they saw that electricity was being used wisely, meaning that if somebody was in a room and the lights were on, then that would warrant a happy face. If the lights were off, that was a happy face. But if the lights were on and there was nobody in the room, that would be classed as a sad face. The same thing for if computers monitors were left on and there was nobody there. Taps left running when there's nobody there. And in this case, they also looked at whether the kettle in the staff room was being filled appropriately. But it's all about getting sort of everybody involved in the process. Always try and make results visual to help, because often savings can be quite abstract. So this school had gone over from a paper-based messaging system to emails, and had calculated how much paper they would have saved, how much that cost, then also put into context of how far all those pieces of paper would add up to if they were put end on end. And that would be a significant amount, and it was something that the children could be able to visualize and see the benefits from in ways other than just figures on a page. It's always good to compare before and after. It can be, in this case, it was done via a graph comparing the use of fair trade products in a staff room before and after a pupil intervention. But it could also be done using photographs with younger children, or with older pupils when it came to maybe developments more physical nature, say out on the school grounds. Here you can see the difference quite clearly between the amount of sugar, tea and coffee of a fair trade nature which is used in the staff room compared to prior to the pupils introducing the topic. Surveys are a good way of collecting information, and this school developed a scoring system based on their action plan to quantify how well classrooms in the school were performing. In a similar fashion to white goods in stores, so providing the different colour thing between very eco-friendly right down to eco-unfriendly at the bottom. Because people are generally familiar with this kind of colour system, it was something that all viewing the results could identify with and support. And in this case, in a secondary school, it was very good at raising awareness to the issues, and when replicated then each term, was able to demonstrate positive outcomes and positive results. So this is what a filled action plan would look like, with each target broken down into how it would be implemented. For example, encouraging more wildlife to the school grounds. It's about developing the meadow area. We require no more log piles, more bird feeders to try to attract the birds. What would they need to do? Who will do it? Well, identifying those. Year 4 will look after the garden, and year 2 might look after the feeders. Whether it was the possible costs involved, in this case, we decided there wasn't going to be a cost. When would you want to achieve it? In this case, it was an ongoing development. And how would you be able to show there was a difference being made? Well, you could do before and after mini-bee surveys and participate in the RSPB Big Garden Birdwatch. So just to recap, your action plan should be developed by the pupils using pupil-generated targets. These are often going to be coming from the environmental review. It should be completed annually, or termally if preferred. However you choose to break it down. As mentioned earlier, look for roughly about 6 targets over the course of the years, more if you believe it's manageable. But generally, we tend to find from experience that 6 seems to be a reasonable number of targets to go for within a year. Being informed by the review, ongoing targets and whole school ideas. So you've got that frame of reference that you can refer back to your review and point out the origin of certain ideas, or point back to previous targets and and recognize this is where it's come from. And then if it's come from a whole school idea, often themes, projects within the school that can be developed. When it comes to sort of, as I would have mentioned in the previous presentation, is don't feel you have to change documents. You'll find that you can always reuse the same environmental review year on year, and then that is a good way of measuring the difference. And when it comes to the action plan itself, don't be afraid of just adding targets on progressively rather than having to publish an entirely new document, because you should be a working document, and those SMART targets reflect the bigger picture and how you'll measure that impact. And importantly, it comes another repeating theme is that it's important that it's shared with the whole school. This is an example where it was shared as a working document for the whole school. It was used as a display, and pupils then throughout the school were able to see progress being made. You were able to see when ideas were being revised, and they could feel a stronger sense of being part of the process. As mentioned with the monitoring, it should be suitable for the level of the pupils. So this idea was taken from a nursery who, rather than using text, were using visuals to describe targets and actions on their plan, which is far more sort of easy to sort of use with the younger pupils. So, for example, when it came to sort of growing potatoes, the target was a picture of a potato. What needed to be done was the picture of the watering can. Who will do it? Then pictures of the monitors who are doing it each day will just be put up. Hasn't been done, a tick, and when they're finished, there's maybe a picture of them having mashed potatoes. These things all can be done in a visual manner and involve everyone. On our website, you'll find tools to help with the monitoring process. We have spreadsheets on utilities, so that's energy and water, waste minimization and transport that can be conducted quickly, but produce data reflecting a longer term. So this example is our transport survey, whereby you input the number of pupils, the number of staff you have at school, and it'll work out the worst case scenario for the school. So how much the school would be using in a normal year if everybody came to school in one car. Now, what you then do is you can fill in this form based on 1 day's worth of information. So on 1 day, you'd count the number of pupils who've walked to school, number have come by car, by bike, and those who've come by bus. And then when it comes to those who have come by car, you then sort of record those who are the only passenger, one of 2 passengers, one of 3 passengers, one of 4 passengers. And you can also involve the members of staff, or if you're in a secondary school, sort of the older pupils, when they're driving, and record if they're bringing passengers with them. What this will then do is extrapolate that information for one day, spread it out across the whole year, and establish how much carbon dioxide your school is saving throughout the whole year. As you can see, there's a review section, so you could run this survey, look to sort of implement some changes, like encouraging more to walk, for example, or encouraging more to cycle, or when it comes to car drivers, maybe encouraging car sharing, and then repeat the experiment or the survey and see if there's been an improvement. So you can now see how the Eco Committee are central to the process, and that environmental review action plan and monitoring loop are a core action taken by them. Tomorrow's presentation, we're going to be covering the Eco Code, the informing, involving, and linking to the curriculum. Very much, it's about sort of the raising the profile of the key processes in the middle there. If you have any questions, then you can either sort of leave them in the comment box below this presentation, or email us at eco-schools@keepwalestidy.org. All the resources we talked about in terms of the template action plan and the monitoring spreadsheets and a few other items can be found at the address on screen on the Keep Wales Tidy website in the Eco Schools section, and there you'll find a subheading for resources. Thank you for watching. I hope this has been useful, and if you have any questions, then do send us an email. Thank you very much.